But first, joining me now to discuss the day's headlines is Deputy Executive Director for the Institute of Public Affairs, Daniel Wild. Dan, a fascinating development this week. Asic is suing Macquarie for allegedly misreporting on short selling over a period of 14 years. Now, what are the nature of the allegations and why is that happening now?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of things. It's I think Asic has been pursuing Macquarie for some time now that they weren't correctly or they were underreporting their short selling. So this can have implications for the broader market, and what Asic is saying is it can impact the confidence of the market. What I think it's really interesting here is that it's an example of what happens, whether it's Macquarie or whether it's other big businesses and banks in Australia, when you take your eye off the ball. Many of these organisations spend all of their time moralising to Australians about, diversity, equity and inclusion, or ESG mandates and quotas and climate change, and, refusing to lend to farmers because of climate change and other considerations. Well, this is what happens when you take your eye off the ball and when you ignore your key business and key considerations, in this case as a financial institutions. And I think a lot of Australians look at this and say, well, just get back to basics, focus on your core business, rather than engaging in woke moralising that I suspect is a part of the reason why they've taken their eye off the ball.
Yeah, it does appear to be that. And look, that'll be very, very interesting once those proceedings progress and we start to see a bit more meat on those bones. Now, Tim Gurner, he's not backwards in saying his piece. He has been very controversial before, but this week he said that he foresees a 15-year rental crisis ahead. So, Dan, firstly, why is it that long, and what does he suggest is the cause?
Well, I think there's a couple of things here, Caroline. I mean, the number one cause that we have in this country is this massive unplanned migration intake that's been taking place since COVID. It has not been planned for, it hasn't had the consent of the community, and it also hasn't been targeted towards areas of economic need. So, we have a housing crisis because we've had this massive surge of demand coming from this massive migrant intake. Now, I'm not blaming the migrants themselves, because of course you'd want to come to our great country and have a better future. But,
right.
It's the fault of governments for having this massive demand without the supply coming online. And it's not just housing. All you have to do is look at the roads, the social services, how long it takes to get into a GP appointment, local schools. Often in many of these developments, there's no local public school in place. So, these are massive issues. And yes, at the same time, we have a supply side issue when you look at the taxes, the red tape, all of the cost imposts upon developers when they actually do want to set up a new development. So, look, the number one thing governments must do immediately is to cut out immigration intake to ease the pressure on the housing market.
Absolutely. And if you are going to bring people in, please bring in tradies, because we definitely need a few more of those. And it'd also be helpful, I suppose, if a few less building companies went under. But, another one of those woes, I suppose, for business, but also for the household, is the cost of energy. And probably the least surprising piece of news this week is that New South Wales is the second most expensive state to run household appliances. And guess what, Dan? The cost is going to continue to go up. So this is obviously going to be unsurprising to anyone with half a clue. But how can these governments continue to fail on energy policy when the reality is clear for all of us to see?
Well, exactly. This has been a long time coming. We've been warning about the consequences of net zero for a very long time. And it's, this is net zero in action. It's how it impacts the day-to-day lives of Australians, not just through energy bills, not just through the increased risk of blackouts, but through the things that we do every single day. And, unfortunately, this is going to continue until we remove net zero and until we remove emissions as a centrepiece of our energy policy. I mean, energy policy should be focused on one thing, and that is cutting costs, reducing prices to ease the burden on households, to ease the burden on businesses, and make sure we can actually have a manufacturing and heavy industry sector again. So, look, unfortunately, Australians are going to keep feeling the pain while these inner city activists push the net zero agenda upon us.
And despite, all of that, and still on this topic, this sector, this energy sector, has vacuumed up all manner of government grants and subsidies over the last few years. And for example, now questions are being asked about FMG's closed Gladstone plant. Well, what's the story here, and how do those subsidies and grants impact the broader industry?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I mean, green hydrogen has basically been shown to be a hoax and a bit of a fraud being perpetuated on the Australian people, and in particular on those who are at risk of losing their jobs in traditional industries. They were told, oh, well, you're going to get new jobs in green hydrogen. Well, I mean, that's just not happening. So, and the other point is this is green hydrogen has been used as a bit of a front to fleece taxpayers of subsidies. And you've got these sort of, subsidy hunters that go around and they set up these projects and get subsidies and then don't go ahead with the projects, or the projects shut down. And I think it's a real issue. I think the subsidies should be paid back where a project does not go ahead. And we also need to get real about this fact that green hydrogen is not the future, at least not at the moment. I'm all in favour of exploring new technologies, but at the end of the day, we need baseload power supply that actually exists right now. And what we have is coal and gas. That's how you keep the lights on and get prices down and keep regional communities ticking over.